The topic of my speech will be zoogeography of the Mediterranean and the ancient circulation of animals. I am deeply honored to have been invited to have a part in this very important conference on the zoogeography of the Mediterranean and the ancient circulation of animals that occurred mainly during the first millennium BC. Let's have now a look to the climatic main climatic characteristic of the Mediterranean basin. Like few other climatic zones in the world, the Mediterranean region is characterized by a subtropical climate with long dry summers and temperate winters. As you can see in the slide, these characteristics of the climate are not only characterizing the Mediterranean tout court, but we can find analogous characters also in California, in Western Chile, in a small part of South Africa, and in a larger part of Southern Australia. From a feature geographic point of view, we can say that the Mediterranean is a biological threshold. Within it, several phytogeographic regions appear. These are, apart from the true endemic Mediterranean characters, also the Saharo-Indian in red, the Irano-Turanian in yellow, and the Palearctic in gray. Until a few years ago, let's say a few decades ago, the Olea Europea was regarded as the most important plant, which can give us an idea of the extension of the Mediterranean climate. But then, and this is in fact the extent distribution of this plant along the Mediterranean shores. But some years ago, some decades ago, it has been noticed that this plant has been deeply influenced by man in its distribution. And so it was better to consider other two elements, phytogeographic elements, to indicate the area of the Mediterranean climate. These are the mastic tree Pistacia lentiscus, and on the left you can see the terebinth Pistacia terebinthus. Their distribution joined together can show a roughly idea of what is really what are really the borders of the Mediterranean climate. As you can see here in the slide, where in red indicate the distribution of the Pistacia lentiscus. In yellow, in pale yellow, the distribution of the terebinth, so Pistacia terebinthus. You can see that this area, climatic area, spans from the Levant in the east to up to Madeira and the Canary Islands in the west. Let's now have a look to the endemic zoological species of this region. Among the bird species, one of the most well-known is the Odrin gull. And you can see in the slide on the right its extent distribution along the Mediterranean shore, which goes from Cyprus to the western Maghreb. Instead, among the reptiles, one of the most known endemic lizard is maybe the Mediterranean chameleon, Camaleo. And here you can see its distribution, which interests a part of southern Andalusia, of the southern Iberian Peninsula. Almost all the North African coasts and a large portion of the Levant and of southern Turkey, southern Anatolia, including the island of Cyprus, of Crete, not of Sicily. There is an error, a mistake here, but the small island of Malta. And recently it has also been discovered in a small portion of the southern Italian peninsula, which is the peninsula of Salento in southern Apulia. One of the most famous endemic mammal of the Mediterranean, of the Western Mediterranean, is for sure the Barbary macaques. You can see in this slide its distribution along the mountain chains of the northern Maghreb, with the very famous and artificial enclave of the Rock of Gibraltar. Then, not all the people know that the wild rabbit is another endemic element of the Mediterranean shores. It has retreated in the westernmost south area of its original range at the end of the last glacial episode. This glacial refuge was represented by the entire Iberian Peninsula. According to some old paleontologists, such as Jolot, for example, its original distribution coincides almost roughly with that of another endemic of the Mediterranean, of the Western Mediterranean. This time we are speaking about a plant which is the dwarf, the Mediterranean dwarf palm, Cameropsubilis. The beautiful Iberian lynx is another endemic mammal of the Mediterranean, which survives only in few areas in southern Spain. And instead, the north central Mediterranean is interested by the diffusion of a special species of hare, which is the Italic or Apennine hare, Lepus corsicanus, which is still distributed in the central southern Italian peninsula and in Sicily. Its name, Lepus corsicano, was given to the animal by Devington at the end of the 19th century because he described these animals on the basis of specimens that he collected in Corsica, where it was introduced many centuries before by the people from Genova. But the Mediterranean is also a universe of islands. Only within the Greek borders, there are about 10,000 islands and islets. And these islands, in the course of the Quaternary, and especially since the beginning of the Middle Pleistocene, let's say from 700,000 and from 700,000, 500,000 on, it was characterized by endemic animals. Probably one of the most famous of them was the smallest elephant which ever existed, and which is the elephant of Falconer, which lived in Sicily about 500 years ago, and where the adult males did not exceed the height of 1 meter at the withers. In these slides, you can see almost all the islands which have been characterized by endemic dwarf and non-dwarf fauna, mammalian fauna, sorry. The remains of this vanished world are today represented by a very few elements, which are 4 species of micro-mammals. The most famous, maybe, of them is the Crocidura sicula, which is still present in Sicily, in the island of Ustica, in all the 3 main islands of the Egadi archipelago, in Gozo. The island of Kerkenna in front of the eastern coast of Tunisia are characterized by the occurrence of a gerbil, an endemic dwarf gerbil, which is called Dipudilus zachariae, and finally, Crete has its own shrew, the Cretan shrew, and recently, no more than 10 years ago, if I remember well, on Cyprus, it has been discovered a probable endemic moose, which has been called Mus cypriacus. In these slides, you can have a look to an element of the melanistic variety of the population of Sicilian shrew from the island of Ustica off the northeastern coast of Sicily. This is the only population of Sicilian shrew characterized by a dark color of the coat. These, as I told you before, are the only remnant of this vanished world of Pleistocene fauna. But we can have the idea that several of these animals reach chronologies very, very close to us, as in the case of the elephant of the island of Tylos, which is in the archipelago of Dodecanese, in the Eastern Aegean. In this island, it has been discovered, they were discovered the bone remains of an elephant, which was no more high than 1.45 m, 1.50 m at the shoulders. So not so dwarf as the Sicilian elephant Falconeri, but almost small to be an elephant. It was a descendant of the much bigger Elephas antiquus, which stood up to 4 meters at the withers. The radiocarbon dating of the bones of this elephant from Tylos is of 4,390 plus minus 600 years BP. It would be like saying that some mammalian endemics, such as this elephant, survive until about 2,390 plus minus 600 years ago. That is already, as you can understand, a Bronze Age chronology. There is an indirect confirmation of this survival that can be seen in a detail from the wall paintings of the tomb of Rekhmire, dated to about the half of the 2nd millennium before Christ. Rekhmire was the vizier of Thutmose the Pharaoh, Thutmose III, and Amenhotep II. In the Mediterranean territories, the turnover from the former to the present-day mammalian fauna is generally held to be an effect of the human occupation. Such effects of human activity date back at least to pre-Neolithic period or the beginning of the Neolithization, starting in the Near East from the Middle Pre-Pottery, Neolithic B and PPB, in the 10th millennium BC, involved geographical areas such as Cyprus, Crete, and the Aegean island, in the course of the 9th-8th millennium BC, extending westwards during the 7th-6th millennium. as it is logical to understand, since then many of the characteristic elements of the biogeography of the region have undergone a process of exploitation that continued up to historical times. However, to assess the range of the original distribution of the different zoological species, earlier chronologies prior to the Neolithization of the Near East and the Eastern Mediterranean should be considered, after which improved human seafaring skills and the established commercial networks between countries allow the exportation of game animals together with the commensal synanthropic species and those already involved in the process of domestication, like, for example, pigs, goats, sheep, cows. Under favorable political and economic conditions, the long-established tradition between the Mediterranean and the surrounding Near Eastern and African countries continued from prehistory throughout historical times. To bring an example of this tradition of exchanging between rulers of different countries, we can remind the famous expedition of the Pharaoh Queen Hatshepsut, that around the half of the second millennium BC organized a fantastic expedition to the south, to the kingdom of Punt, to get the plants of myrrh and frankincense. Coming back to Egypt, she brought with her several species very important, such as cheetah and giraffes. With giraffes, other animals from the African territories beyond south of Nubia could also arrive in Egypt, such as intriguing blue monkeys, as is shown in this detail where blue monkeys is climbing along the neck of a giraffe, again represented in the tomb of Rekhmire. Similar monkeys, blue monkeys, have been found in the wall paintings of an Aegean site on the island of Santorini, in the ruins among the ruins of the site of Akrotiri, the Minoan site of Akrotiri. And they have been dated around the time of the eruption of the volcano of Santorini, which is dated about 1630 before Christ. In this slide, you can see the island of the Aegean Sea, where this motif of blue monkeys is recurrent in the wall paintings of the Minoan settlement. These are Milos, Santorini, and Knossos. In reality, these blue monkeys are the portraits of an African monkey, very well known, which is the greeted Chlorochaebus aethiops, and which is distributed still today in this area of East Africa. On the island of Santorini, in the building Beta B, room Beta 1 of the same settlement of Akrotiri, they have been discovered, there was discovered also a depicted herd of beautiful white antelopes. These white antelopes are the portraits of the submarine gazelle, Nanger semeringi, another gazelle, another faunal element characteristic of East Africa, where it is still distributed in that part colored in blue. So we can say that the evidence of a trade between Eastern Africa and the Mediterranean world, in particular the Aegean world, is attested by the importation through the Egyptian markets of afrotropical faunal elements, such as the sub-Saharan sommering gazelle, the white antelopes, or the grills, the blue monkey. And we have not the time in this occasion to discuss it, but the reproduction of both the species that I have presented now is so peculiar and so sophisticated that for sure the Minoan artist must have had in front of his eyes a living animal. Something, however, could also have come from the nearby Western Asia, not only from Africa, is the case of this tusk, elephant tusk, found, dated to about the 1550 before Christ, found among the burned remains of the palace of Zacro in eastern Crete. But these were not of African elephant, but of Asian elephant. The discovery of exotic species or durable parts of them attests the importation, as was noted before by Christopher, into the Eastern Mediterranean, Egyptian, and Near Eastern Bronze Age of exotic species and raw materials that were precious even for the countries of origin. All these materials must be considered luxuries which the flourishing Bronze Age economy could afford. So this is a map showing all the sites which provided remains of Asian elephant in the Near East. You can see we go from Basra, at the end of Mesopotamia, before the beginning of the Persian Gulf, up to the Levant, you see, and not only the Levant, but also, let's say, Central Eastern Anatolia. We have, for example, the site of Marash. These brought some of the specialists on elephant to extend the former distribution of this proboscidean up to Mesopotamia. In black, you can see instead only the regions now inhabited by this animal. We are speaking always of the same species of elephant, which is Elephas maximus. There is a period from roughly the half of the 7th millennium up to the 9th century before Christ, in which we have a large series of evidence which attest the presence of probably a herd or more than one herd of Asian elephant which inhabited this area of the Levant along the course of the river Orontes, and in particular the plain, the alluvial plain in black, which is called today Gab. The last documentation, we have both archaeological, literary, and artistic, iconographic, elements to say this. For example, during his campaign in Syria, the pharaoh Thutmose III had a sort of fight with one of these elephants, and the chronicle of the time report that he was forced, the pharaoh, to cut the hand of the elephant because there was not an Egyptian word to translate trunk. The last documentation which can be referred to this presence of living elephants in the Levant is that in the Near East, is that in the Western Near East, is that on the obelisk, black obelisk of Shalmaneser III, dated to about 825, where it is shown an Indian elephant, an Asian elephant. You can detect it very easily from the shortness of the ears and from the convex back of the animal. The African elephant has the contrary, has a concave back. The custom of moving animals from one's own homeland to new territories continued without an apparent solution of continuity in the course of the first millennium BC. Detail of the Neo-Assyrian bas-relief of Assurbanipal throne room at Nimrud inform us that animals very peculiar were brought to the attention of the Assyrian king. In this case, as you can see, we are dealing with a specimen, with an individual of Baral, the blue sheep, which actually, at the moment, survive only along the Himalayan area, range. So that means that Assyrians were able to go up to the higher mountains to get this kind of animal to present to their king. Another strange animal which appears in the bas-relief of the palace at Nineveh of Assurbanipal is that represented in the hunt of wild equids dated to about the 645 years before Christ. These images have been considered by many authors, such as depicting onagers, equus, equids characteristic of the Near Eastern biogeography. But only recently they have been referred to the phenotypes of the wild horse of the steppes of Central Asia. Also in this case, probably, the Syrian king organized some expedition up to the central steppes of Asia. Another animal of Indian origin, the Indian swamp deer or Barasinga, appear in several of the bas-reliefs, either in the Sennacherib palace at Nineveh, dated to about the 700 before Christ, or again to the hunting bas-relief of Assurbanipal palace. Here you can have a look, an idea of the former distribution of the three subspecies extantly existing of the Barasinga, and the only place where the three subspecies still survive. The green is Branderi, in red is Duvacelli, and the blue one is the third one. The ancient records of the long-known Syrian Proboscidean or the lesser-known Mesopotamian Indian swamp deer may well be considered among the practical results of the international trade. But let's leave now the 1st century BC Mesopotamia to have a look at the Phoenicians. Commonplace in modern zoology is to believe that it was the Phoenician, Punics, Carthaginians who exported many of the zoological species outside their homeland, determining their current distribution, mainly in the course of the 1st millennium BC. Phoenicia tried as a maritime trader and manufacturing center from about 1,500 to 332 BC, and was highly regarded for its skill in shipbuilding, glassmaking, the production of dyes, and an impressive level of skill in the manufacture of luxury and common goods. In Iberia, the Carthaginians developed important commercial colonies, such as Cadiz, the mythical Tartessus on the Atlantic coast of the peninsula. The Punic presence in the Iberian Peninsula lasted from 575 to 206 BC, when the Carthaginians were defeated by the Romans. However, there is very little archaeological and literary evidence that inform us about the presumed responsibility of the Phoenicians in exporting animals between the opposite shore of the Mediterranean basin. As far as is presently known, the sole archaeozoological evidence of the transfer of a zoological species definitely attributable to the Phoenicians concerned that of the Egyptian mongoose, Herpestes ichneumon, in the 5th, 4th century BC Sardinia. Later on, it was imported to southern Iberia, and its original range of distribution was North Africa and the Levant. The carnivore would have been disappeared afterwards from the large Tyrrhenian islands. So a few years later, this record, no more mongoose were present on Sardinia. Something similar we can say for the rabbit, because it has been exported for the, as far as is presently known, still is, it was exported outside from the Iberian Peninsula in the 1,300 years BC, because there is evidence, archaeological evidence of its occurrence in Menorca in that time. But the only evidence that we have of its importation into the central Mediterranean is not prior to the 1st century BC, 1st century AD in Malta, where probably it has been imported by the Phoenicians. These are the only two records, archaeological records, about the responsibility of Phoenician in moving animals. There is one species in particular that is still deceptively believed to have been exported beyond its homeland by the Phoenician. This is the fallow deer, the common fallow deer, not the Persian or Mesopotamian one, Dama. Actually, the species is distributed artificially in all the continents. During the last glacial episode, so let's say around 20,000 years ago, the common fallow deer retreated into the southernmost areas of its former distribution, the north-central Mediterranean shores, and especially southern Asia Minor. Afterwards, it did not return as far north as the reach of its previous European range. As I tell just a while ago, there are today two subspecies of fallow deer. On the right, you can see the common fallow deer, Dama. On the sorry, on the left. On the right, instead, there is an image of the Persian fallow deer, which is larger and with a completely different development of the antlers. This is, biogeographically speaking, the distribution, the ancient natural distribution of these two subspecies. Dama 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 is recorded west of this red line, Dama dama mesopotamica east of it. And this red line possibly coincides with the extension of the Amanos Mountains, which is, by all point of view, a natural threshold which divided the two subspecies. I am speaking of the natural ancient distribution of these two animals. They believe that it was the Phoenician who distributed the common fallow deer in the ancient Ecumene is essentially based on an observation by the paleontologist Jolot, which in 1935 merely speculated that this cervid had been introduced to North Africa by the founders of the city of Tartessus. By the way, it could be interesting to observe that no records of fallow deer has been never found before the before antiquity in North Africa of this animal. This assumption has given rise to an unproven cultural model that still persists. In fact, the practice of importing fallow deer from their natural range began much earlier, at least since prehistoric time. As far as is presently known, the oldest evidence of the export of the Mesopotamian fallow deer, that is to say Dama dama mesopotamica, beyond its homeland, dates back to the end of the 9th millennium BC, when remains of these subspecies were found in the pre-pottery Neolithic B settlement of Chilurocambos on the island of Cyprus. Instead, for the common fallow deer, we have to wait for more recent Neolithic chronologies coinciding with the late 6th 5 millennium BC, when the first remains of the subspecies, Dama dama dama, were found on the island of Rhodes in the Aegean Sea. In this map, you can see that, still severed by this threshold represented by the Amanos change, Dama dama mesopotamica was exported from the Levant to Cyprus, whereas Dama 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 was exported from from southern Anatolia to Cyprus and to the rest of the Balkan Peninsula, not excluding, of course, the Aegean Islands. In the north-central Mediterranean region, instead, the common fallow deer reappeared for the first time in, the Neolithic assemblages of the site of Rendina in the vicinity of Melzi in southern Italy, in the province of Potenza, referred to between the middle of the 6th and the 5th millennium BC. In this site in Rendina, remains of Dama 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 have been discovered together with biological elements characteristic and exclusive of the Near East, such as the Asiatic mouflon on the left and the wild goat on the right. Among the earliest appearance of the latter species in the Italian fossiliferous horizon. This does mean that all these three elements coming from the Near East were introduced in the same chronology in Rendita. Back to the Phoenician and Carthaginians, it is well known that they experimented new navigation routes in search of unknown lands to trade with or to raid. We have a solid literary source that informs us about the certain transfer by the Carthaginian of an exotic animal, or rather, it would be to say a part of it. In fact, it refers only to the skin of a killed specimen. Is a literary source, I repeat. This report is contained in the Periplus or Circumnavigation of Africa by the Carthaginian Hanno the Navigator, dated to the first half of the 6th century BC, and which has unfortunately come down to us only in the fragmentary edition of the Codex Palatinus Graecus. At the command of Hanno, a Carthaginian fleet went far beyond the Pillars of Hercules that were then considered the extreme limit of the world's borders, the Escatiaites Oikomenes, beyond which the unknown opened up without interruption. This 6th century expedition sailed into the outer ocean towards south, reaching the coast of Western Africa, and when they arrived in the bay called the Horn of the South, approximately in the present Sierra Leone, they found an island filled with wild savages. The biggest number of them were females with hairy bodies, which local people called gorillas. Hanno brought with him back to Cyrene a skin of these gorillas, which according to Herodotus' witness, was exposed for some time in the temple of the town. It was the first time that the word gorilla was known in the Western Ecumene. Since the beginning of the 1st millennium BC, other animals have been imported from the Near East, North Africa, and apparently even from the Far East to the shores of Mediterranean Europe, and in particular the Italian peninsula. Is the case of the jungle fowl. Distributed from the Indian subcontinent to Indochina and the Indonesian archipelago, the jungle fowl, the wild ancestor of all domestic chickens, populates both the mountain jungles and the equatorial forests, as well as green areas of the anthropogenic environments. Some studies have placed the beginning of its domestication in northern China Neolithic, but contrary to what Xiang and others 2014 claimed, it is not yet clear when the first domestic chickens actually appeared there. Although they were unknown to Homer and Hesiod, chickens appear on Greek coins from the town of Himera on Sicily before 842 BC and in Ephesus in 700 BC. There and on the Greek mainland, they may have been introduced from Persia and probably entered Italy through Greek colonies shortly therefore. Not by chance, the cock was described by Aristophanes as a Persian bird. Persia was in fact on the trade route connecting the Far Eastern countries and the Mediterranean shores, and an incredible quantity of goods traveled through it, coming from the Indian subcontinent to the Far East and heading towards the Mediterranean. Just to make a few examples, for example, the peach is one of this element. In Italian, for example, it is called pesca, which is a corruption of the word Persia, which is Persia, or the prezzemolo, which is dill, if I remember well, I don't remember, is a green vegetable, dill, yes, I think. Persil, sorry, persil, in its name, it contains still the root of the word Persian. The oldest occurrence of the bird in Italy so far available would be contemporary to its first appearance in the Greek coin iconography. In fact, as far as is presently known, its bones have been provided by the excavation of the Etruscan site of Monte Cucco, close to Rome, dated to the end of the 9th, beginning of the 8th century BC. Other exotic animals, or the image of them, were apparently imported in Italy in the so-called Orientalizing period of the Etruscan culture, dated to between, the end of the 8th and the 6th century BC, but lasting even in full, still in full 5th century. One of these animals was the cheetah, which was employed in the hunting activities. We had the evidence of its occurrence, but it could be also the importation of an iconographic model in Tomba Campana, which is dated at the end of the 6th century BC and is in the Etruscan necropolis of Veio, very close to Rome. You can see the animal seated on the back of the horse in the way in which usually they used to bring the felid to the hunting ground, as it is attested, for example, by several other later iconographic documents, such in the case of the detail of these glazed capped from Nishapur, dated to the 9th century AD, or in this detail of the painting by Gentile da Fabriano, Adorazione dei Magi, referred to 1424, to the year 1424, is still on exhibit, on display in the collection of the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. The image of another felid of the second felid used in the Near East for hunting activities is the caracal. On the left, you can see the extant distribution of the animal that, as you can understand, cover the majority of Northern Africa and most of the Near East. And the evidence of its image come to us in the necropoli of Tarquinia, which is another Etruscan necropolis. It is not always possible to document the past presence of a certain zoological species in a specific territory and or particular cultural context solely on the basis of the data offered by archaeozoological research, especially when we are dealing with animals that were utilized by an elite, such as royal and or aristocratic hunters. This is the case, as example, for this tomb, which has been recently discovered and studied. It is called Tomba dei Demoni Azzurri, which means the grave of the blue devils, and it has been referred to the first half of the 5th century BC. It is in the necropolis of Tarquinia. Most of its wall paintings were destroyed, but a new technique experimented at the University of Pisa allowed to reconstruct the original design. And you can see here a beautiful scene of hunting scene. Among the elements represented in this hunting scene, there is a peculiar one, which is a caracal. And it has been obtained through a multispectral photographic process. It has been published rather now, last year. Returning now to our common fallow deer, Dama Dama Dama, the subspecies seems to have arrived in the Western Mediterranean only with the Romans. But even this assumption, accepted by most of the authors, is rather questionable. How questionable it is to attribute to the Romans, from Brem 1816 onwards, the responsibility of the introduction of the porcupine, Istrix cristata, in Italy. Voila, the porcupine. How you can understand from this slide, the distribution of these rodents interests Africa, and very curiously, in Europe, of all Europe, only the Italian peninsula and Sicily. So this is almost strange. Brem, in 1960, was the first who argued that the Romans imported the porcupine from northern Africa to Italy. Many authors have then accepted this hypothesis as an established dogma, notwithstanding the fact that, until recently, nobody has specified either the place and the date of this event or its causal agent, whether natural or anthropic. Only recently, however, it has been demonstrated on the basis of undeniable archaeological discoveries that the crested porcupine does not occur in Italy before late antique or even early medieval times. I mean, being capable to produce living population, and that it never spread in Europe beyond the Italian peninsula and Sicily. Another animal very famous in Roman time was the peacock, the Indian peafowl or peacock. The bird native to the Indian subcontinent was much appreciated in antiquity. This oriental bird had its first appearance, it seems, in the Western world in Egypt at the time of Ptolemy II. So let's say around 285 to 246 before Christ. In ancient Rome, the peacock was regarded as a luxury element and much sought after on the tables of wealthy hosts. In his De Re Rustica, Lucius Junius Moderatus Columella observed that these are birds which can be kept with the greatest ease in the wooded islets that can be found south of Italy and along its coast. Pliny the Elder reported the food use to which the bird was the object. The first person at Rome to kill a peacock for the table was the orator Hortensius at the inaugural banquet of his priesthood. Fattening peacocks was first instituted about the time of the last pirate war by Marcus Aufidius Lurco, and he made 60,000 sesterces profit from his trade. Finally, it is interesting to say a few words on another Oriental animal which colonized the geography of the ancient Mediterranean, where it seems to have arrived much later than other zoological species, the domestic cat. All domestic cats are derived from the African wild cat, Felis sylvestris, referred to the phenotypes libica, and not from the European wild cat, which has never been domesticated. In Roman times, the cat was not yet so widespread as a domestic animal, and other carnivores of medium and small size were preferred, among which a special place was occupied by the weasel. In this slide, you can see some of the weasel skull discovered in a pit of the Roman settlement of Oderzo in northeastern Italy, dated between the end of the 1st century and the beginning of the 2nd century AD. It seems that the domestic cat was still uncommon in the early Roman imperial period, becoming much more diffused in later times, to judge from the relatively large number of bones from the 5th to the 7th century AD in Naples and in other sites of Roman Italy. At the end of the Roman Empire, however, it is documented more or less everywhere by scattered osteological remains. The custom of moving animals, especially if they were exotic and precious, from one place to another continued beyond the Roman Empire and doesn't seem to have suffered a significant setback either in the Middle Age. Thank you.